So one of the things I like to do is in the mornings, specifically on Sunday mornings, I like to go in my backyard and kind of practice and review and go over the sermon and everything. And this morning, I was just kind of thinking about like life, and we're going to talk about like what it means to feel alive. And there's this one point I'm going over my notes, and all of a sudden I could get a drip on my forehead, and it's like a cold drip, and it's like it was refreshing and it was alive. And then all of a sudden I thought, I hope that's water. Right? But then I saw the umbrella in our backyard, and it dripped again. I was like, okay, whew, thank you, Jesus. But with that, here's what I would love for you to do is I would love for you to turn to the person next to you and answer this one simple question. It's going to pop up on the screen. And that is, what is something that makes you feel alive? So go ahead and turn and talk about that. What is something that makes you feel alive? All right, so here we go. What were some of those things? What are some things that make you guys feel alive? What were some of the things you guys said? Family, okay. Being in nature, music, being with the grandkids, loving on your dog. Amen. Food. What was that? Volleyball. Ice cream. What flavor? Okay, all right. Sorry, I didn't mean to push the pressure on you right there. Um, any more? Any more? All right, so here's some of the things that I was thinking about that make me feel alive. One is I do like being outside. I was working on my sermon this week in the backyard, and there was like a breeze blowing against my face. It was just great. Or there's sometimes in the morning I like to walk, and there's this townhomes, like a bunch of townhomes that are built together. And so in front of the townhomes, there is this bush. There's like an area of bushes. And in the morning, I like to kind of run my hands through it because it's like they're wet. So you kind of get the dew on your hands. And then the bushes are like rosemary. So then you get the dew in your hands. You kind of smell your fingers, which might look kind of weird as you're walking. Like, what is that guy? What is that guy doing? you know. Another thing that makes me feel alive is playing games with my family. That's just so much fun. The other thing that makes me feel alive is when I tell a joke and my wife laughs, you know. Because I can tell you now, that's my wife, by the way, for those of you that may not know. But I can tell you now, it does not happen often. So when I tell a good one and she laughs, especially like a good belly laugh, that makes me feel alive. Turn to, in John chapter 10, verse 10, it says this. It says, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. So there's two dual purposes that we see in this passage. It says, first of all, the thief's purpose, right? The thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. And typically, when we think about a thief like breaks into your home or breaks into your car, and they actually take something from you. And so I would agree that the enemy probably wants to try to take some things from us. But I think that there is another way that the enemy can still kill and destroy our lives. I don't know if there's a show on Netflix. It's called Kaleidoscope. And this show was about a guy who was a thief, and he was in cahoots with another guy, and that guy betrayed him. And so he ended up going to jail, and the other guy ended up getting rich. And so the show is about he finally gets out of jail, and he begins to concoct this scheme so that he can get back what was stolen from him. And by the end of the show, that works out. But basically what he does is there were these, I guess, bearer bonds that were stolen. It was like billions in bearer bonds that were stolen from him. And so what he does is he works it out where he gets those billions in bearer bonds back and replaces them with paper. So basically counterfeit inside. And I think that is a great way to give us an illustration of the way I think the enemy steals from us. Is what he does is he offers things that are counterfeit. So we begin to fall for those. So God is saying, look, in me there is life and life to the fullest. Because that's what Jesus said, right? I've come to give them a rich and satisfying life. But what the enemy does is the enemy says, oh, hey, life over here, life over here. And so what happens is sometimes we fall for that and we get ready to go. And again, so what that does is this counterfeit leads us away from what we think will actually make us, or we think is going to make us happy. And in actuality, it doesn't. So that is the purpose of the thief. And then Jesus says his purpose is to give us a rich and satisfying life. Some versions will translate that as an abundant life or life abundantly. Other versions will translate that as life to the full. The Greek word that is used there, it literally means like exceeding, like exceedingly full. Like we've had fullness, right? We've experienced fullness. But wouldn't you agree that there's a difference between being full and being Thanksgiving full? Would you guys agree? Right? And so what Jesus wants is not just fullness, he wants Thanksgiving fullness. For us to experience that, I mean the kind of fullness that you have to like open your belt and pop that top button to make room. That's the kind of fullness that Jesus desires for us to have in our lives. And so over the course of this series, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but we started a series called What is Love? Baby, don't hurt me. Sorry. You're going to hear that for this whole series, so there's like 4 more weeks, so just let you know. But what is love? And so in this, what we've done is the first week, we actually looked at the word love itself, because it does make sense that if God is saying, love me in this way, then we need to make sure we understand what he means by love. Because if we try to love God in the way that we define love, but it's not the way that he defines love, then ultimately we never really connect with him the way that we're designed to, and we're never fulfilled by the relationship with him the way that we're designed to. So we talked about that love, and in week 1, we look at that what's called agapao love, and it's a love that is continuing to move and to grow and to develop. And the other thing that we saw about this love is that it is a love that we don't have to try to develop on our own, that God actually walks beside us to teach us how to love him and to empower us to love him. So that's pretty incredible when you look at it that way. And so then what we did is there is a part called the Great Commandment. That's really what this is about. And our church, the core values of our church, they're driven by the Great Commandments. And so I thought, well, we need to know what those mean so that we can love him the way that we are called to love him. And so with that in mind, for this last week and for the next few weeks, we're going to be covering Mark chapter 12, verse 30. And that is, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all of your strength. All your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all of your strength. So last week, we looked at heart. We talked about heart last week. And the reason why it's in a box, and it's a very ugly box, you could tell, but we talked about heart last week. And the idea behind what we're doing with this series is we've been looking at that the key to really being able to love God the way that we desire, or he desires for us to love him, is to make God our home. And we would all agree that there's a difference between a house and a home, correct? There is a big difference. And so last week we kind of dove into the fact that once you made a commitment to Jesus Christ, your residence changed. Your address changed. So your address is now in heaven. But the issue is that Jesus could be your house, but he may not necessarily be your home. So what I mean by that is, for example, is if you define your identity and your life and your happiness by your career, then your career is your home, but Jesus is just a house. Or his finances, that's your home, but Jesus is just a house. Our relationship, that's your home, but Jesus is just your house. And so what we did last week is we talked about that if we're going to make him our home, then that means literally we have to move our heart to him. We have to move our heart to him. So that way he becomes our home. So we talked about heart last week. This week, we are going to talk about soul. We're going to talk about soul. Sorry, that was a Soul Train reference for those of you that used to watch that. But here's the question that we really want to wrestle with, and we're going to wrestle with over the course of this series. And that question is simply this: what does it mean to make God my spiritual home. What does it mean for me to make God my spiritual home? And as we look at this word soul, so I did some diving into this word this week, and it was really interesting because there are several interpretations of what soul means. So if I wanted to go through all those interpretations, we'd probably be here. I'd be preaching until like at least 5 o'clock today. And you'd be like, you'd be by yourself until 5 o'clock today. I'm going to be home eating lunch and watching preseason football if it's still on. But, oh no, that was yesterday. But the idea behind, so what I decided to do is take one that I felt really spoke to what we desire to do out of this series. And then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of another into it towards the end. But the Greek word for soul is suak. But the interesting thing about it is you can find it where either the middle letter is a U or the middle letter is a Y. Why is that interesting? Is because this is also where our word that many of us are familiar with. If you've gone through counseling or gone through therapy, you've met with a psychologist, right? And so that's where we actually get the word psychology from. But the thing that's really interesting about it is it only looked at that part of it and looking at the soul, where we derive psychology from, really only focused on the emotions. But when I start to dive into it, I saw that it was so much more than just emotion and desire. And there's one thing that really, really spoke to me because the literal meaning of the Greek word for suak, the literal meaning of that word is breath. Which is really great because our last song said it's your breath. And I love that. Somebody sang breath, didn't they? Oh, was that you? Okay, all right. I was like, oh, wow, thank you for that. But it literally means breath. Now, if you think about your physical breath, like if you're swimming, or is it swimming? But if this is underwater. So if you're swimming, right? Don't you love that? That's some great imagery there. But if you're swimming, there is one point where initially your body will begin to say, I want oxygen, I want air. And eventually what will happen is your body will begin to fight for air the longer that you stay under it. And as a matter of fact, eventually your body will fight for air so much that it will actually cause you to breathe in involuntarily because it's fighting for air that much. And have you ever had that moment? Like you hold your breath as long as you could and you're swimming, and then you come out, you stick your head out of the water, and what do? Right? You're taking air. Why? Because air really is a source of life, right? If we don't breathe, we what? We die. If we don't breathe, we die. When I was a kid, I had a cousin who thought it was funny to put a pillow over my head. They thought it was really funny. And so I'm like fighting, I'm trying to get out. And so eventually I find his face and I clock him, you know? And he's like, well, why'd you hit me? I was like, well, why'd you put a pillow over my face? I thought it was funny. Well, it wasn't funny, you know, kind of thing. But but what happens is we fight for physical breath. And so now if we look at this idea of love the Lord with all of your soul, and if that soul is suak, then love the Lord with all of your breath. Now we begin to think, what are the implications of that? Because spiritually, your soul desires to breathe. It desires to breathe. So why is this so important? What we can do is, if you look at this passage in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says this. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground, and he breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Now, some commentaries will say that that's at the point when he breathed into us, that he breathed our souls into us. But no matter what, we know that he breathed life into us. And here's the thing, is ever since there is our creation, there's been a desire for life. There's been a desire for life. Because we know that a physical presence here on this earth is not enough. It's just not enough. Let me do a quick survey. How many of you have ever thought this exact phrase or something like this? There's got to be more to life than this. If you've ever thought that, raise your hand. There's got to be more. Yeah, pretty much unanimous. We've all thought there's got to be something more to life. Like you pursue your education because that's what everyone tells you to do. You pursue your education, you get your education, you get the degree, but at the end, I feel good about the degree, but there's got to be something more to life than this. And then you get your career, right? You're excited about your career. Maybe you get some bonuses. Maybe your career is upwardly moving, but there's still some part of you that wonders there's got to be more to life than this. Then maybe you get married and you are with your spouse. And the thing about your spouse is no matter how great your spouse could never meet every single one of your needs the way that God can. So there's still that part where you desire, like, I love this person, but there's still got to be more to life than this. And then you have that bundle of joy, right? And you're so excited about that bundle of joy, and then that bundle of joy doesn't let you sleep for 8 months, and then that bundle of joy also pukes all over you. And then you wonder, like, there's got to be more to life. I mean, I love my child, but there's got to be more to life than this. And so we find that in every avenue of our lives. Why? Because everything that life prescribes to us, or this world, I should say, that prescribes to us, like that's where life is found. And then we pursue it. And even if we're thriving in it, there's still a part of us that realizes that this isn't all that it cracked up to be. That there's still something missing. There's still something more that I desire. Someone put it this way, that there's a God-shaped hole in all of us. But the idea is we want to breathe. And spiritually, we want to breathe. So spiritually, we want to find life. Spiritually, we want to feel alive. Spiritually, we want to feel alive. So you guys know that one of the things I've kind of had fun doing recently is when I write my sermons, I also love to ask ChatGPT or Google AI questions. I just want to see what it says. And so what I did in the search is I put, what does it mean to feel alive? And this is what Google AI said. You can read it right on the screen. Feeling alive is a deeply personal experience, but is often linked to engaging in activities that bring joy, fulfillment, and a sense of purpose. For some, it's pursuing passions, taking on challenges, or making positive changes in their lives. Others find it through social connection, helping others, or simply appreciating the present moment. And all of those are great, right? All of those are great. But they all have something in common. They're all temporary. They're all temporary. And if I go back to the thief's role to steal, kill, and destroy, and I think what the thief has been very effective at doing for both non-Christians and maybe even Christians, and that is to begin to cause us to pursue something else for life, thinking that it's going to bring us that fulfillment that we're looking for. So there's a great passage in 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, that gives us an idea of the places that we tend to try to find life that are counterfeit. It says, for the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and a pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. Simply put, they're counterfeits. They're counterfeits. And basically, that's what temptation is. Temptation is simply a draw to pull you away from real life to counterfeit life. And have you noticed that once you begin to pursue counterfeit life, it's never enough? It's never enough. So here's what I did, is I kind of made a list. So I said, cravings for physical pleasure. What does that look like? Maybe it's sex outside of God's design, gluttony, maybe overeating, alcohol, drugs, getting high, but also not negative. It could also be physical fitness, where my physical pleasure is my body being chiseled. I look in the mirror, and I don't know, do you pose like that? I don't know what I just did. But my arms are cut, or my legs are cut, my calves are cut, my stomach is cut. I got the six-pack, kind of thing. Sometimes people find their fulfillment in their bodies. Or sometimes maybe it's plastic surgery, right? If I can get the if I can get this fixed, my nose fixed, my chin fixed, my forehead smoothed out, or the wrinkle taken out of my eyes, if I could do the plastic surgery. And some people even begin to become addicted to plastic surgery, don't they? And again, the whole desire is for me, and they may not necessarily identify, well, maybe they do find physical pleasure out of it, but the whole idea is for me to try to carve something in myself that makes me feel fulfilled about me. It also said the cravings for everything we see, the house, the car, the iPhone 47. Now, I know we're not at that number yet, but eventually we will get there. And it'll be interesting to see what that phone looks like. The jewelry, but it's things that we see that drive us. And it's very interesting now because how much advertisement do we see? How much? I mean, you can't get away from it, can you? Uh, I mean, do you remember when YouTube had no ads? Do you remember that? It seems like it's so long ago. Do you remember when Facebook or social media had no ads? Now you see it all over the place, right? And the thing that's interesting is, what are ads designed to do? Ads are designed to to capture your heart and say, I want that, because that's what I need to make me fulfilled. I want that. So then, of course, we go out, we purchase it. The Amazon box shows up at the house, and then, it doesn't meet the need. It says pride in our achievements and possessions. So maybe getting that degree, getting that job, there's pride that can be in that. The house, the car, the girl, the guy, um, and it's just the pride of achievement. So like, oh my goodness, you live here? Oh, you have a bidet? It's all of those things like you look at, and it's like it's having that pride and that kind of thing in it, or the pride in the car, right? Those kind of things, or sometimes success. If I can get success or fame, if I get to a point where I feel like I've arrived, kind of thing. Um, there's that pride that comes from there, and then we think that maybe we will fulfilled and will be satisfied. But the problem with every single one of those things is that they're still what? Temporary. And here's the thing about them is they may give you moments of feeling alive. Like, it does feel alive when you get that check, especially when that check has multiple zeros behind it. You can feel alive in that moment. It does feel alive when you sit in the car and you get that new car smell, right? And you drive it off the lot for the first time, and you have Apple CarPlay, and you're like excited about that because I remember when I got Apple CarPlay, and that was an upgrade for me. I was so excited about having that in my car. This is great. But yeah, and then maybe you have Apple CarPlay now that you don't have to hook a cord up. You just get in your car and it connects automatically. Am I revealing my own lust? my own desires kind of thing? But those are things that we can but again, those things, they may feel good in the moment, but ultimately they don't last. They don't last. They don't bring fulfillment that we thought that they would. Howard Hughes, again, was once asked, how much money is enough? And his response was, just $1 more. If I could just get that next dollar. Because it never satisfies, it never fulfills, or it never maintains that feeling of being alive. When you go out to the car and now the car is dirty and there's bird stuff all over the car. It's like, oh, and then you get in the car and it doesn't smell like new car. It smells like baby diapers in the car, just whatever it might be. It's just lost its thing. So I wrote a definition of temptation. You can see right on the screen. Temptation distorts what God designed for our enjoyment, turning it into a counterfeit source of life and meaning. So I want to make this really clear, because sometimes you'll go to certain churches and they'll say, well, that's evil, that's bad, that's evil, that's not what this is about. I'm not saying get a job is evil. I'm not saying want to work hard and be successful. And I'm not saying that's evil. I'm not saying want to sit down and enjoy a really good meal. I'm not saying that's evil either. But what happens is when we pursue that for life, then what it does is it robs us of what real life truly is. And we're settling for the counterfeit as opposed to settling for Him. And so the thing that we have to ask ourselves, because loving God with all of your soul really is about figuring out what is it that I pursue for life, meaning, purpose. What does I pursue for that? And once I begin to figure that out, then I can begin to look at how do I connect with God and begin to ultimately be able to find that in Him. Because here's the challenge, and this is something that we have seen too, is let's say that you invest yourself in counterfeit life. Let's say you invest yourself in your home, you invest yourself in your job, you invest yourself in your car, you invest yourself maybe in that relationship. The problem with those things that are temporary is what happens when you lose them. Who are you? Like, who am I if I lose my house? Who am I if I lose my job? And realize we're not too far removed from having to ask this question. Because wasn't this an issue during COVID? And how quickly we forget. And just think like COVID was just like 4 or 5 years ago. But we were asking these kind of questions during that time because we were looking at losing our jobs. We were looking at all of those, we were looking at the consequences of this disease, this pandemic. And it began to cause us to wonder, well, who am I? But now that things are, we've moved beyond and things are better, we've gotten the vaccine, we're doing all right now. So now the issue becomes, things are great. So we kind of lost sight of going back and wondering, and so we begin to have redefined ourselves again in those things that can be lost. So who am I? Who am I if I lose them? Another thought for soul is that I saw that I thought was really interesting. It was saying that your soul, that your body is made up of 3 components. So your body, your soul, and your spirit is the idea behind that. That's one of the theories behind it. And so if that is something that we could take and apply, there's something I saw that I thought was really interesting. It was saying like your soul is what drives you to either connect with God or disconnect with God. It's where you that passion that you pursue. And so the idea that what temptation does is temptation draws your soul to fulfill itself, and really what you're doing is you're meeting your base needs on a physical. In other words, your body is the one that's driving the car. Your body's the one that's so in other words, what you're doing is you are pulling your soul down to its most base level, which is your body. The other thought then, if that being true, then if we're made up of spirit, then your spirit is designed to connect in intimacy with God. Another word for that would be worship. That we begin to worship Him, pursue Him, value Him, go after Him. So then the idea behind that then is if I make the desires of my soul to pursue Him, then I begin to raise my soul to the level of my spirit, and that opens the door for intimacy and connection in my relationship with Him and my growth in Him. So we have to decide, what is it that we want to pursue? Do we want to pursue temptation, or do we want to pursue worship? Which is that we want to pursue? And ultimately, as we pursue worship in Him and who He is and growing in intimacy with Him, it begins to hopefully change us in such a way that we are loving Him. So as we look at this, you can see this right on the screen. To love God with all your soul is to make Him your greatest desire, the one that you chase after for life, purpose, and identity. That He is the one that I go after for that I pursue finding that in Him. So now here's the question then. Well, Ken, that's great. What does that look like? What does that look like? So we're going to get real practical. So if you want, you can write these thoughts down as well. So you want to open up the notes section on your phone and kind of write it out. You can write it there too. But here's the first thing that will help us, and that is pursue personal connection over performance. Pursue personal connection over performance. Here's what I mean by that, is when it comes to the things of God, do we do them based on performance? And what does performance mean? We do them because we have to. I have to read the Bible. I have to pray. I have to go to church. I have to, because those are the things that good Christians do. And those things are driven by performance. Now, we could also look at it this way. I pick up the Word of God because the Word of God is, I do that not because I have to, I do it because I know that that's the way that He speaks to me. I know that's the way He speaks to me, and I look forward to that. And you know that there's a tool that I talk about. If you go on our website, and if you hit next steps, and then you hit Bible study, there is a video there called the SOAP method. And the SOAP method is also what I used to put together the Gospel of John devotional that I've written. And it's all based on just using the SOAP method. The idea behind the SOAP method is that you use scripture, observations, application, and prayer. And then what you do is you read a passage, you look for those things, and ultimately you get to a point where God's kind of speaking to you through scripture. But you're looking at it as an opportunity to be able to connect with Him and grow in Him and your relationship with Him. But no matter what you do, that your goal is to pursue personal connection over performance. The other one is let God define your identity. That's the second step. Let God define your identity. Because here's the thing. Again, if you put your identity in other things, they can be lost. But could you imagine what will you approach to life, to career, to even success? What would it look like if your identity is already set before you even begin to pursue those things? So it would be freedom, right? Because if you achieve it, great. If you don't, I am who He says I am. Success doesn't define me. My job doesn't define me. My career doesn't define me. My relationships don't define me. I am who He says I am. And who does He say you are? He says you're forgiven, you're loved, you're accepted, you're worthy, you're valued. And all of those things are declared by one action, His death on the cross. His death on the cross is what declares your value and who you are in Him and the way that He sees you. But then not only that, His resurrection. That also shows, it confirms everything that He declared as well. So let God be the one that defines your identity. Here's another one is daily surrender. Daily surrender. And so what do I mean by that? It means that we begin with asking God this, whatever decision that I make today, Lord, help me to see how you're guiding me. Help me to see how you. Now, be realistic, okay? I'm not talking about like, dear Lord, I'm looking at the Taco Bell menu, and do you want me to have a chalupa or a bean burrito? I'm not talking about those kind of decisions. You know what I'm saying? But it's getting to a point where we begin to look at everything that drives us. And we look at, okay, God, help me as I'm making the decision for this direction. Help me to make sure that I'm aware of you and who you are. And sometimes the answer may be, yes, go in that direction, but still make sure that you're not defining yourself by the direction that you're going in. So it's important for us to understand that. But again, daily surrender, and ultimately, you know what daily surrender also means? It means that I trust in His plan. I trust in His plan. Because here's the reality is it's easy to surrender when things are good. It's easy to surrender when there's no confusion. It's easy to surrender when we don't have doubts. It's easy to surrender when things are falling into place. But I'm talking about surrender when there's confusion. God, I don't know how this is going to work out. And God, I am frustrated as all get out by the direction that this is going in. I'm just being honest. I am. But God, I know you're good. And I'm going to trust that however this works out, that it will still be for your glory and for your honor. See, that's an aspect of daily surrender as well. Next is living with an eternal perspective. Living with an eternal perspective. So the idea behind that is if everything is temporary, then let me live for what's eternal. And then also, how can I begin to move what's temporary into a place that is eternal? How can I begin to do that? I'll give you one prime example. Let's say that you're at home and you're doing your chores, and you take your broom and you begin to sweep. And as you're sweeping, you're saying, God, thank you. Thank you that I have a home to sweep. Thank you, I have a broom to sweep my. Thank you for this dustpan. So, and then what happens is, and God, even if I don't have this home, God, you're my home. So then everything can become an act of worship in your life as well. As you're driving your car to work, God, thank you for the gift of this car. Thank you for giving me patience because this guy just cut me off. God, every aspect becomes worship that we do in Him. So we just start to look at everything and recognize this is temporary, but He is eternal. And as a result of that, I begin to live for something greater than what's now. Live for something greater than what's now. So even that, like, God, as I go to work, how can I be of an eternal influence when I'm at work? And I'm not talking about, because sometimes we try to be an eternal influence. Well, I've seen people try to be an eternal influence, and it just kind of turns people off. It just kind of does, you know. I went to a hotel once, and the guy was behind the desk, and I was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" He's like, "I am blessed in the Lord, brother." And most people would just say, "Fine," right? Um, so I think sometimes we can go overboard with trying to be an eternal influence. But I'm just talking about, like, just being encouragement, seeing the best in others. How about this? Do you pray about your office as much as you complain about your office? Should I just stop the sermon there? Right? Eternal perspective. Because the trial that's in front of you right now, as well as the blessing that's in front of you right now, that may not be eternal. It could just be temporary. But He's eternal. So living from an eternal perspective. And also, finally, building your life around God's kingdom. Building your life around God's kingdom. So as I look at that, for example, one of the things that described Jesus when it came to living His life is a life of intentionality. That wherever He went, He was a person of influence in drawing people to come to know His dad. And let me tell you, sometimes the influence wasn't necessarily Him speaking. Sometimes Jesus, I think His influence was just that He was fun. Just fun. I mean, when you look at the religious leaders of Jesus' time, and then you compare them to who Jesus was, there were times where Jesus just hung out. And He was fun. So I think sometimes living with a commitment to say, God, I want to build your kingdom. I just want to be a positive influence. Sometimes we can just be fun and laugh, enjoy a good joke. And as a result of that, then maybe what we could do is we could begin to bring levity into an area and also bring light into it. Living with an eternal perspective also means that, like, when I walk into a room, love walks into a room. When I walk into a room, encouragement walks into a room. When I walk into a room, peace walks into a room. Why? Because He's with me, and I'm representing Him. And I want to represent Him in such a way to where if someone were to ever consider who Christ is, that they would be able to see the example of my life, and it would draw them to want to come to know who he is, living in such a way that we are making a commitment to build God's kingdom. And I think this is really important, especially today. You know, it used to be back in the 90s and the 2000s, if you wanted to build a church, you could just put a postcard in the mail and people would come. Now you put a postcard in the mail, it ends up in the trash, most likely. Um, and I've been around pastors who lament that, who lament the direction that this world is going in, and it is not as easy to just draw people to come to know God. I'm kind of someone on the opposite side of that. I kind of praise God for it. Let me tell you the reason why. I think in the past, what's happening in a lot of churches is the church relied on the pastors and the church to draw people in. And it was just easy for the church to do. But now, because of that, because of the situation of the world, pastors are very limited in the influence they have just because of the life that they have. They don't have the connections that you guys have and that kind of thing. So I think it's exciting because what this means is that God is putting the church in a position to where now it has to act like Jesus into this world. And what does it mean to act like Jesus? Jesus left the comfort of heaven to be with those who are far from his Father so that they can come to know his Father and who he is through him. And so now I think that this is the opportunity that God has given us as we begin to represent him and who he is that we have an opportunity to go out and step into the lives of our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our fellow students, whatever hobby we might, fellow pickleball players, or whatever it might be. Is it pickleball? Okay, I just want to make sure. Whoever it might be, but that we can be out and connecting with others, and hopefully in those relations begin to draw them to him. So as we look at all these things, this is what it means to love God with all of our soul, that God, you are the prime passion of my life in finding my identity in you. And there's nothing that I would pursue more than you. Because why? Because you are life. Your life. And as a result of that, I grow him. So here to counter, one of the things, because we make a commitment to live by the great commandment, which is love God, love others, and love yourself, that really is the core values of our church. And so what we do is every message we end by looking at how do we pull that out of the message. So here's the first one: love up and loving God. Pursue God for life, purpose, and identity. Pursue God for life, purpose, and identity. And I'm going to tell you the example of the kind of pursuit I'm talking about. I may have used this example in the past, but I remember when I was a kid playing tag, right? And so what happened is when you would get tagged, who would you chase? The fastest kid? No. You would chase who? The slowest. You would chase the kid that you knew you could catch and you knew you could get away from. Right? That's what I mean by pursuit. Is because here's the beauty of it. God is running slow enough because he wants you to catch him. So we began to pursue him and pursue him relentlessly. Because that's, I'm going out there. They cut right, I cut left. I will pursue, and I will not stop until I have caught you. Let's make that the kind of passion with which we pursue God. Love out. Become an influence for a fulfilled life. Show others how to begin to be able to do that. And then love in. Figure out where you're seeking life and redirect it toward God. Because here's the thing, and this is really important. As long as you are pursuing as long as you're pursuing what is temporary, the reality is you will also never really see yourself. Never. You'll never be good enough. You'll never achieve enough. You'll never be satisfied enough. It's ultimately pursuing him. And again, what happens if it's lost? So it impacts the way that we see ourselves and we love ourselves as well. And God desires that we love ourselves too. So figure out where you are seeking life and redirect it toward him. Father, I thank you